This real-side experience would begin with me operating from my aside from creation real awareness view. For on the real side, we can operate from two positions, broadly speaking. On the physical, we are very much locked into the consciousness, and although we can be indifferent to its idea constructed design, although we can maintain our real awareness nowness positions and be on our process of releasing all the idea agreements and attachment ideas that make up its construction, our awareness is still encased in the consciousness, a consciousness that is a part of the overall collective consciousness that, according to the ideas that make up its collective construct, affect the simulator as it currently stands. For to be operating in a particular simulator is like choosing a particular computer game, and according to how that game currently is, how it has developed, its current updated state, these are the ideas awareness must take on that become a consciousness, and then effected from that consciousness is the body form that can decode, decipher, convert these ideas into a simulation, and there we would be, in the simulator we had chosen, with all the other awareness beings also operating within it. And so our consciousness must contain the same ideas, the files that makes up the simulator, as all other participants. Shared ideas then that effect shared experience, and this is then rather a collective consciousness, with all awareness operating through it, and an overall effected arena then, where all partaking of it are not beyond the reach and range of any other, and what differentiates individuals is what they personally create in addition to the simulator template idea file game they have, in a sense, uploaded. And so the computer analogies stack up, as the simulator is indeed a vast multi-dimensional computer-style simulation, and deciding on the ideas of a simulator that form a consciousness that then is a part of a collective consciousness of all those also operating in the same simulator, is akin to uploading a specific computer game to our computers, and the computer then has the mechanics to render the game on the screen, just as our body vehicles allow the ideas to be decoded into experiential simulation. And the computer operator would be the real awareness, that which we would endeavour to recognise, be in the nowness of, and view our simulated experiences indifferently, not be attached to the ideas that make up their construction, or we would become lost in the illusions of simulation we are experiencing. We would forget and disconnect from the real awareness that we are, that is the computer operator. which from a computer game playing perspective would sound rather strange, and yet this is exactly what occurs in the simulators, as the personal self is formed through free will activation of ideas, as we acquire a certain body type with such a facility, and then the personal self becomes overbearing and the connection to the real awareness is lost. The real awareness, which is always there, but to be that which we all are, this one overall awareness isness, so must we cease activation of the body vehicles of the self, which as we do so activate, so we are encapsulated within the effects stemming from the ideas thus created. We are operating then from the personal self, and removed from a position where we are this everything awareness reality, but a necessary secondary personal self, as we then can compare the two positions, that of the whole everything real awareness nowness standing isness, to the parts pieces that we encapsulate as created ideas and then experience the effects of through the simulators, and this comparison affords us our recognition of the is, and the purpose of the simulators, which is this is recognition, is complete, and assuming we can release and detach from all and every idea, for any idea we can't release, we are choosing to remain the effects of and experience in creation, we can then extricate ourselves from creation. We can turn off the computer game and walk away from our computers, literally speaking. But as I was saying, on the physical, regardless of our process of awareness, or the extent to which we stand in the nowness of the real awareness, we are very much locked into the simulation. The computer is turned on with the game running, or the virtual reality headset firmly in place. Onto the real side then, we have the option of remaining in the simulator as affected from consciousness. We can maintain our virtual reality wearing of our headsets, and then can operate as multi-dimensionally as we decide, or we can be aside from the simulator. And although we can be in the real awareness nowness on the physical, unlike the physical, on the real side, we can remove the consciousness headset, and we no longer are operating within the simulation. We no longer are effecting a body form that can intermingle and interact with all other beings throughout its multi-dimensional construct. For the real awareness that we all are is one overall awareness, one isness, everything reality, and although the personal selves that have been created may consider themselves separate from all others, as indeed the simulation presents visually as division, differentiation, separateness, etc., in fact, all personal created selves, all consciousness, is animated through this one isness, real awareness reality, and so effectively it is one overall awareness playing endless simulated games with itself through all its created body forms and consciousnesses. As such, as we remove ourselves from the consciousness that effects differentiation and illusionary separateness, as we step into this everything is position, we have effectively a view of everything. The entirety of all consciousness is effecting into a simulation. From this aside from it all position on the real side, and so can the personal self be shown whatever makes the most sense for it to see, like selecting which idea of all the ideas of all consciousness is to be viewed, as though choosing a particular show or movie from all those available on our televisions. For the real awareness, its essence is all about real survival, is all about the endless recognition of the isness that it is, and so, should the personal self align its intent with this real essence, this real intent objective, so will everything that occurs on the real side be toward that end, as everything is as it is now in reality. Intent is already the completion of itself, but simulation rolls out as it does, and we go through the simulation of what is already a completed intent, assuming we maintain that intent, and so the process, what we are shown on the real side, always makes the most sense, awareness and life speaking, for the personal self to see. And really then, all we need do is just ensure our personal self is aligned with the real intent, maintain this focus, endeavour to be in the nowness of the real awareness, and everything rather takes care of itself. Anything occurring simulated wise, real side or physical, is rather secondary, and in fact, just as we can be in the nowness of our real awareness while on the physical, while in the consciousness that is effecting into our simulated, multiplayered computer game arena, so this can be on the real side, as we do decide to operate multi-dimensionally in a creation, rather than this aside from it view, which again, as we do so we decide our real intent focus, by virtue of our decision to be the nowness of our real awareness, and thus real awareness does what it does, everything that pertains to life and the overall endless recognition of the is, and we can rather just sit back, the personal self, and simulation rolls out accordingly. We do all these extraordinary things and adventures, as the real awareness operates always in accordance with what makes sense with all life. And should we step into the personal self, we rather are disrupting this, and indeed are resigned to what the personal self knows in regards to a creational traversing and dealings with everything the simulation comprises of, its decided mechanics, etc., and which, as I have experienced, should this occur, we rather are bewildered as to what to do and how to operate, where to go and how, as the real awareness position is an access to everything, as the real awareness is everything, is through all consciousness, and however all consciousness has decided that effects into what is, to a personal self, a very confusing simulator of endless variables. That is all manageable for this real awareness, and no amount of confusing technology, how to operate this and that, dialoguing with any species in their own respective languages, etc., is beyond the real awareness ability. But anyway, there I was, having my aside from creation, real awareness provided view. I was observing a kind of university, and as I watched, so would groups of various assorted beings be approaching the building. These beings had generally rather a distortion of body type, everything from demons to entity-type creatures to shambling, two-legged werewolves, and indeed, it seems werewolves were the predominant species present. Distortion of a body type would have been, like everything is, something decided, for as we decide, as we create, as we agree to the ideas we do, so we effect experience that reflects the nature of these ideas, and this would include where we are positioned, creationally wise, our planet, etc., and the body forms we are operating through. And naturally then, the more distorted are our ideas, the more abrasive are our life choices. These reflect their nature. Everything equals itself, and we can find ourselves in very unenviable life positions, such as the lower astral, and in equally as unsavoury body forms. And indeed, werewolves, entities, demons, are very real, and I have had my fair share of encounters with such on the real side, and most would reside in the lower astral in accordance with what they had projected for themselves through their unbeneficial and life-restricting choices and decisions, their particular brand of ideas they had agreed with. But every body type, every consciousness, regardless of the decisions they have made, all are in reality this real awareness, that like all real awareness, the objective is the recognition of the is, and so underlying all that which is decided through the personal selves is this drive, this real intent, the essence of the is and real awareness, that of continued self or is recognition. And so, although the personal selves were essential for our comparisons between the two states of being, one simulated, the personal self, and one real, the real awareness, the personal self does have to decide and align with this real intent. For to completely be something, one must be it completely, or you cannot be that which you completely want to be. And the is a reality that rather has to be 100% decided on. For what would be less than 100% would be that which isn't the which would be then that which it isn't, which would be something creational, idea-wise, an attachment to a piece or a part, and a single idea will keep you the effect of it if you can't let it go, and this then is a decision to remain in creation. But of course, one generally can't jump instantly from 100% personal self-immersed to 100% real intended with the it is a process. But if the individual is 100% personal self-immersed, nothing of life, the guides, can get through. But as the personal self decides differently to begin such a process of awareness, so then life facilitates and operates always as it can, according to the percentages it is free will allowed to, as this is its essence, and the essence of all awareness, that of ever-escalating awareness and recognition of the isness of itself. And so it was here that these various demons, entities, werewolves, etc., who had been indulging 100% in their particular brand of personal self-ideas, were rather making their first initial steps toward the literally speaking, as it is more of a removing of what denies you this real awareness standing and is recognition, the layers of ideas of the created self, than an actual walking toward anything, as everything is here and now, in isness reality terms. And so, what had been set up for these previously rather dark beings was a kind of reform school, almost as though a school for attitude adjustment, a smoothing out of the more abrasive aspects of these beings' consciousnesses, for it has often been said that to get into the real universes, one must become harmless, and these particular beings, the werewolves, demons, entities, etc., were about as abrasive a species as you can find in creation. So much by way of a personal self-refining would be required, and indeed, standing at the school entrance, just as you might see with any school, as the students arrive where there would be teachers at the gates, so it was here that the guides would be present, and greeting the various beings as they made their ways into the school. The real awareness always can determine the authentic, genuine guide, for the guides recognize the and this recognition has a certain signature to it. Such a recognition is aside from anything creational, any idea of the body vehicles. It is more a signature only present with the true reality the guides are in recognition of, and as such a signature only our real awareness can determine, as our real awareness is a part of all real awareness and of this isness, including the guides, and as we stand in the nowness of the real awareness, so we have a steady influx of impressions regarding intent of all we encounter, as the real awareness reads all ideas of the consciousness that are behind what is projected from it body form-wise, including intent, and also the real awareness affords us verification of who are the genuine guides and who are the impostors, as it reads the ears recognizing signatures, should they indeed be present, for often will the dark forces attempt to mimic a guide, but of course will lack the recognition of the ears, and this the real awareness will determine, the ears recognizing a signature absent. And so it was. These were real guides, as the real awareness impressions verified, and this was a reform school created by the guides for the benefit of these previously dark beings, still dark to a great extent, as they would have quite the way to go, but all were agreeable to this, as free will can't be violated, as we always are the deciders of our experience. This is the nature of creational mechanics, and unless we employ sneaky marketed ideas that are other than what they appear to be, like the controllers, where what is agreed to is not what it appeared to be on the surface, really it is the individual who must decide to step up and take the risk to be and see more and become more aware. All we can do is present the opportunity and be there for them when they are ready, such as this situation here, whereas these beings were so agreeable, so they allowed then the guides to do what they do, assist and facilitate the awareness processes of these werewolves, entities and demons, who really, as most dark forces are natural risk-takers, go-getters, and tend to make the greatest strides where the awareness process is concerned, should they take it on. The scene would switch, and I would find myself in the company of another individual, and it would seem that I was bestowing information upon him, the information of which was very complex, that which my personal self would have no inkling as to, and so evidently that, as I mentioned earlier, as we stand in the nowness of our real awareness, so we are afforded access to everything potentially, including the delivering of information beyond the personal self's ability to comprehend. The nature of the information was lost to my personal self, therefore, just the sense of its complexity, but information essential to be passed on to the other individual in my presence. And although information, like any idea, is then creationally based, and really has nothing to do with the ears, other than another reference and comparison for it, as all ideas are, As we go through our real-side activities, the real awareness will coordinate and orchestrate situations where what has been decided through the consciousness, the created ideas, the tech, information, etc., if it can be utilized, life and awareness beneficially, then it makes sense to do so. This was such a situation, as though this information, now given into the hands of this other, that my real awareness afforded assurances as to his sincerity, would ultimately be of a benefit and assist creationally in some form or other. Interestingly, to access this information, I had to rather adorn a kind of robe, which had an exceedingly long hood, a hood that when placed over the head seemed to go on forever, in some curious way, as though once worn, one was lost in some void or other, within the fathomless depths of the hood, until the hood was removed. Maybe some kind of garment that affords the wearer access to certain information sourced from a certain creational area or dimension, again along the lines of just utilizing what has been decided in creation, that if wearing such a robe provides access to such information, then it is a case of just utilizing these decided ideas, whatever they may be, if it makes sense to do so. And although the real awareness could access everything, no funny robes necessary, as I have often said, utilizing these consciousness-decided ideas and curiosities makes for a more interesting experience and more likely recollected on awaking. But then, moments after I had removed my robe, were my associate and myself attacked by another individual. My real awareness impressions revealed him as a dark force agent, deployed to attack us specifically as a result of this exchange of information, which evidently the ever-watching dark forces were not overly pleased with. Very likely it may undermine in some way their control of the simulation via their maintenance of agreement that affords them this control. And again, each individual decides the ideas that they will. These become additional to the consciousness, and the simulated experience is effected accordingly. As such, nothing can be our experience unless we decide on the ideas that make that experience so. Individuals will create their consciousness, their intent and inclinations, drives and thrill-seeking proclivities as they do. You have then everything from dark force controllers to subservient slaves, with all the various abilities and skills each individual has developed and decided upon. But regardless of how a body form is constructed and its abilities, as effected from a consciousness, and despite how, yes, we share the simulator with all others, who have taken on the ideas of this particular simulator, and so we can readily encounter everything from dark force beings to demons to monsters, as everything is really packages of simulated ideas. These ideas can't have a bearing upon us unless we agree that they can. Effectively, we must decide that a monster with its might and power can impose itself upon us. This becomes an idea file we place in our consciousness, and now potentially the monster can, if it so chooses, do just this. Look at any computer game with its various assortment of characters. How the programming of the game is such that certain characters can destroy others, but how other characters, although to look at them one would assume must be vulnerable, and yet are programmed in such a way to be more bystanders or shop vendors, say, and are not touched by the game's monsters that seem to dispatch the armor-clad warriors with ease. This would be a good analogy, as each individual has a certain programming of the consciousness that not only dictates experience, but experience as it pertains to others, and only if the idea agreement is there that an individual can be harmed by another will it be so. The trick of the controllers, or any controlling, dominating being, is to get that agreement from you, that you agree that they can harm you, and if not, they can do nothing, and over the eons of lifetimes have beings of this dark persuasion done just that, trolled agreement to their power, that they can then potentially at any moment express it, as the permissions allow, experiencing their abrasiveness as we have in fact decided. The process of awareness is a releasing of all these agreement ideas, including those that allow the dominance of others over us, that were installed wherever and whichever lifetime they may have been, and once completed, no individual, regardless of how they have constructed their consciousness, which has effected their body forms, with whatever abilities and power they may possess, can impose their abilities upon us, to harm or dominate us, unless we consciously agree that they can. As such, we become more and more indomitable, despite our body types, just like the meek-looking and vulnerable shop vendors of a computer game that lack the programmed ideas that allow that they can be attacked. So it is, we can walk through a creation invulnerable. But it is a process, and until complete, there will be agreements still to be released that allow the attack of others on the real side and the physical, etc., and occasionally we come across these beings where agreements still are present that have us the recipient of attack, despite standing in the nowness of our real awareness, as the real awareness can't move against what is a free will, a personal self-decision to experience being attacked, by virtue of this agreement held to, a kind of contract between attacker and attacked, that is binding and can potentially always play out according to its nature until released. And so it was that this dark force agent was such a being where agreements harboured between my associate and myself with him allowed that he could attack us and be successful with doing so. As such, he produced a very wickedly sharp sword, and would swiftly dispatch my associate with a thrust of this blade. And again, as my associate had in reality decided to experience this, which the agreements to this attacker ensured, no one can assist what is a free will decision that this be so, unless my associate had ventured agreement that I can assist, and still then the extent of my assistance would be according to his agreement parameters. A little like a computer game, where a creature is killed by another as a part of the rolling plot line, but your character is unable to assist, as this is how the game's program dictates. This is how the agreements between and of all those involved, the ideas, are installed. This dark force agent would then turn his attentions to me and begin thrusting at me with his blade. As I said, my real awareness impressions alerted me to the fact that agreements with this being that I still harboured would ensure his successful attacking of me. And so, what took place next is what I have described before, where often as we come across such beings, where agreements are retained that allow their attacks, we often identify, unveil, and release these agreements on the spot, and so this expresses as a change in a situation, from us being attacked successfully to us now able to defend ourselves and best our assailants, as no agreements dictate our defeat at the hands of our assailant, and the real awareness brings whatever means and methods to bear that are necessary for the protection of its personal self. Sometimes the agreement taplines we can release instantaneously, sometimes they take a few moments, depending on the agreement and the extent of its convoluted nature. How deeply rooted it is. Does it branch off into various other agreements that add complexity and make it more difficult to release? And my inability to release an agreement on the spot generally expresses as a simulation where I am on the run from my attacker, and such was the case here. As I worked to release this tapline, so would I be pursued across creation seemingly by my dark force assailant I just couldn't seem to shake. One of my real side evasive tricks, if such are required, is to find buildings or structures in whichever part of creation I happen to be in, and somewhat warp into and immerse myself into their very structure, that my attackers then are unable to reach me. As simulation goes, what is solid in relation to our body vehicles would be that which resonates at the same electromagnetic polarity, which produces a repelling effect which presents as solidity, and this is why ghosts can warp through what are solid objects if they manifest on the physical, as their astral body vehicles are at very different frequencies than a physical body. As such, nothing of the physical level would present as solidity, as a repelling energy field to them, as it would to a physical body. And yet, on the astral, these frequency relationships would also exist. Certain electromagnetic energy fields would present as a solid to the astral body if the frequencies were of the same polarity, and so were one to alter their electromagnetic energy field, the body forms a base frequency state, so would their relationship with other objects change, and we have had examples of this, where people can walk on water, walk through walls, or even levitate. As water and gas present now as solids in relation to their now altered electromagnetic energy body forms. And so, this would be the ability I bring to bear on such occasions, as I operate in a creation as effected from consciousness, as through the real awareness I am not limited to how the consciousness has decided as to such limitations, and we rather can bend the rules or break them, so to speak, breaking really what are agreement ideas that dictate these rules. But despite my fleeing across creation and hiding within what should present as solid objects, buildings, etc., seems my pursuer had a similar ability, and so it proved to be a fruitless effort. The scene switched to one of my physical level house, recreated on the real side, aptly so, for my process of removing this agreement, which allowed my assault at the hands of this dark force agent, which had been expressing as my retreat across creation, as though I had to be on the run until the agreement was released, now would culminate in my being in my house. The house recreated does represent the consciousness, the storehouse where all our agreements and attachments are found, and so a direct representation of perhaps the final stages of the releasing of this tapline agreement, and a verification this was what was taking place, as a simulation is effected from what we are deciding, doing, etc., and should we find ourselves in our recreated houses, very often this is why we are there, for tapline addressing and releasing purposes. And of course, regardless of agreements maintained or severed, there will always be agreement between all in this simulator, in that the ideas that effect the simulator's construction as it currently stands will be shared, potentially, as I said earlier, allowing that anyone can enter the experience of any other from a creational, multi-dimensional perspective. And the house represents the consciousness, which would be connected with all other houses or consciousnesses that affects the overall simulator. So naturally, individuals can enter our homes at will on the real side, as that representation goes. But then, were we to take the house as our own personal individual consciousness, specifically in regards to our agreements and attachments, aside from the simulator template idea agreements we share with all others that have us all operating in the same game arena, then who can enter our houses would be those we have these agreements with, consciously or subconsciously, and should the agreements be redacted, the individual cannot enter. Going along then with the latter representation, that only those I have direct agreement with can be present in my house, and not an open house to all in the simulator, through ideas shared that effect a shared simulator arena where anyone can potentially enter anyone's experience. Sat in my house on a chair now would be my father, though my real awareness afforded impressions revealed that he was a real guide in my father's form, as often guides assume the forms of older family members, parents, grandparents, older siblings, etc. It was as though he was simply watching on. My agreement always extended to the guides. Hence the guides always able to be present in the consciousness representing house when they decide it is necessary. And evidently the agreement, not quite severed with my dark force assailant, would express as him manifesting now in the house also, and still brandishing his sword. Alas for him, the chase had afforded me the time to complete my agreement releasing, and now, unshackled by agreements, through the personal self-consciousness that dictated otherwise, could my real awareness bring to bear what was necessary to defend the personal self. Amusingly, I transformed, in fact, into a two-legged werewolf, which seemed to give me the strength required to so defend myself, although really no form changing would have been required, as with the agreement removed, any attack on the part of this dark force agent would now fall short, and this could express, simulated-wise, in whatever way it might. But perhaps again, this was something, some feature, that would better have the experience stick in the mind on awaking. He would lunge at me with his sword. I rather caught it under my now excessively hairy armpit, forced him against the wall, he pushed off from it, I stepped around and behind him, seized the sword at both ends, and proceeded to saw his head off with his own blade. Somewhat a gruesome dispatching of my attacker, but more representational of how, as the head would surely represent the literal self, and all ideas can be construed as literal, including then the entirety of this situation, the agreement that allowed my assailant to attack me successfully, the simulated retreat across creation, and the removal of this agreement that allowed the besting of my attacker, so the removal of the head rather indicated the severing of this idea that bound me to the dark agent, an agreement that potentially always could permit his harming of me, a kind of exaggerated tearing up of a karmic agreement contract, and of the information that I provided to the other individual that the dark forces deemed necessary to send an agent in response to, who can say? Maybe more will be revealed in time as to the nature of it, but along the way, so was another agreement tapline addressed and released, and one less creationally based being that can bestow harm upon my personal self, and perhaps I may be shown as to how the werewolves, entities and demons are progressing in their reform school, as all beings who step up are less than a burden on the simulator, as the simulators go through their deterioration through the restricting and limiting ideas of the consciousness held to, as the simulators are the overall consciousness affected, and through the process of awareness with each individual, so these ideas are released, and the simulator impact lessened accordingly, like turning off all the web pages and sites you ever had visited from your computer that remain on the screen until you do, and the computer becomes less burdened as the data it must carry is gradually lessened.
Okay, Kevin, cool. It's really good. A lot of experience there, a lot of explanation. So it's nice to see that some of these body types are waking up, which they are all over. So yes, we're having the most fun. Thank you.
Hello, this is Jeremy. I have an experience here to share. It's a quick one. I have it written down. I'll read it as I wrote it. Here. In this experience, I was in a small home, like a mobile home, and helping an individual sort through their belongings and getting a garden going outside. So amongst this cleaning and organizing, I was cleaning a shelf off, and behind said shelf was a cubby-like window that opened up to the outside. And I reached into it, and when I reached into it and threw it to the outside, I had a thought form come through to where I had the idea of fear that I could be grabbed, and instantly I recognized that from that idea I created something. And I remember closing the window, and then I opened it again, and there was this teenage-like boy with blue eyes, blue to me signifying sort of the mental idea of that fear. And then I pulled him through the window, to which he was totally kind of nude. He didn't have any clothes on. And let's see. And he was now standing before me, and he was full of attitudes of all kinds. I remember I tried to speak to him, and he had certain kind of attitudes. And so but I recognized that these were all my own attitudes, sort of like an objective view of them. And from that moment, I decided, I made the conscious choice to change these attitudes. And with that, the form of the boy changed to feminine, to which it had its own attitudes that I also recognized and realized that needed to be recognized and released. But I also came into recognition as I talked to this being that I had created. I asked them what they were going to do, and they said, well, I'm going to go on a journey now of becoming more aware. And so I told them to sing the new you and ask Rebazar for guidance, or Rebazar for guidance. And I recognized as this individual was putting clothes on and getting a backpack full of ideas and certain things like baggage, I recognized that the fear that I created surrounding this individual that had caused him to become so in the first place, that the fear is only of myself, that anything that you fear on the real side, whether like when I used to get experiences, I used to be afraid of the dark and I wouldn't go into dark areas and such and such. But that fear is just of things that I've created and ideas that I've created. So when you're running away from things, or you're running away from things out of fear or whatever, you're just running from yourself. So that's all I wanted to share.
Cool, Jeremy. Thank you for showing up. That's good. Yes. It's all very simple. Just stand and face it and see it for what it is. It's no big deal, but it's part of it. Again, a comparison there. And so, yeah, little by little, you get to see more. Thank you.